Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into something that is just absolutely profound, which is how digital archiving is essentially acting as a powerful form of cultural resistance. We're going to explore the Noolaham Foundation. They're this incredible organization entirely dedicated to digitizing, preserving, and most importantly, democratizing access to the endangered history of Sri Lankan Tamil-speaking communities. It's this fascinating collision of modern technology and ancient heritage. So let's just jump right in.
To really wrap our heads around this, we first have to acknowledge the harsh reality that makes this kind of work so absolutely crucial. Preserving cultural heritage in a post-conflict environment, it's incredibly tough. In Sri Lanka, decades of civil war and systemic marginalization led to the tragic, literal loss of physical history. Our sources point to one really potent symbol of this erasure, and that's the burning of the Jaffna Public Library back in 1981. That single event left these massive, devastating gaps in the tangible historical records of the Tamil-speaking populations.
And honestly, looking at that kind of loss forces us to pause and ask a pretty heavy question. When physical history is just gone, how does a culture survive? How do you pass down knowledge and literature to the next generation when the very books holding that identity are literally turned to ash? That is the monumental stakes of our explainer today, and it's exactly the challenge the Noolaham Foundation decided to take on.
Section 1. The Volunteer Spirit. Origins of an Archive. So, to understand how they tackled this massive problem, we really need to look at their roots. Because this wasn't started by some huge, well-funded government agency. No, it was sparked by a grassroots movement. It was driven by this deep, collective volunteer spirit, something the Norwegians have a great word for, dugnadshånd. It's that community-driven push to just roll up your sleeves and build something for the common good.
If we trace the timeline back, you see these fragmented, super dedicated volunteers starting to digitize things completely on their own. Back in 1999, pioneer Rathina Ayer Potmanaba Iyer kicked things off by digitizing literary works with Project Madurai. Fast forward to 2004, the Ila Newell project launched, focusing specifically on the northern and eastern provinces. And then finally, in 2005, all these passionate, separate efforts realized they were stronger together, and they converged to launch Project Noolaham as a united voluntary collective. Moving into Section 2, Building the Foundation, from collective to institution. Well, volunteer passion and informal networks are amazing, but they can only scale so far. By 2008, their user base was exploding, and the limitations of running on volunteer-dependent servers became a major bottleneck. The pioneers realized, actually, if this history was going to be truly secure long-term, they had to evolve. They had to transition from a passionate collective into a formal, professional institution that could handle some serious technological infrastructure. Let's track how that transition actually happened. So in 2008, the Noolaham Foundation was officially formed to sustain these initiatives. But the real game changer hit in 2009. A sudden fundraising surge from just 72 donors brought in over 1 million rupees. That was huge. It allowed them to hire their first dedicated program officer and really step away from being just an informal network. By May 2010, the whole shebang was formally incorporated as a legally registered, nonprofit guaranteed company in Sri Lanka. And the physical proof of that institutional leap is represented perfectly by their 2010 annual report. Having that kind of formal documentation really marked a deliberate strategy for them. They kept the grassroots content acquisition volunteer-driven because that local connection is vital, but they totally separated out the legal, financial, and technological responsibilities so those could be professionally managed. The impact of that formalization? It was literally immediate. When you look at the collection highlights from that era, the acceleration is wild. They went from just a few hundred documents in the early years to adding a staggering 3,109 documents in the year 2010 alone. Professionalizing their setup directly meant they were saving more history, way faster. Section 3. Grassroots to Global Diaspora, a trans-territorial network. As they grew, a new challenge popped up. How do you capture the full, diverse breadth of an entire culture without accidentally centralizing everything in just one major city? Their fix for this was to become trans-territorial. That means they built this expansive global footprint while still keeping their roots planted firmly in localized grassroots connections.
So here's how this network actually operates in practice. They've got local digital scanning centers spread right across Sri Lanka, places like Jaffna, Trincomalee, Batticaloa, Akarai Patsu, and Noolaham. And then those centers are connected to globally registered diaspora chapters in Canada, the UK, and Norway. It's an absolutely brilliant structure because it prevents geographical bias. Having local hubs everywhere ensures that super specific regional dialects, unique local folklore, and historically marginalized voices don't just get overlooked by a central office.
Let's walk through what this looks like for a single item. Imagine a fragile, incredibly rare book on traditional Siddha medicine turns up in a remote village. First, a local volunteer acquires it and physically brings it to a regional scanning center. Second, it gets digitally converted using high-end scanners and tagged with international library metadata standards so people can actually search for it. And third, that digital file is immediately backed up to a global server network. The physical book goes back to the owner or gets donated, but its knowledge, that's now immortalized. Of course, keeping a decentralized machine like this running smoothly requires some serious governance. The foundation relies on a community-led stewardship model. You've got a board of trustees handling the corporate authority, an advisory committee of experts giving strategic direction, and specific task forces running the day-to-day core, regional, and global operations. It's a highly structured but still deeply collaborative way of working. Section 4, the Digital Fortress, Infrastructure of Preservation. Now, all of this amazing local scanning effort would mean absolutely nothing if the digital files themselves weren't safe. So let's talk about the highly advanced technological backbone they've built to guarantee this newly digitized history is never, ever lost again. First off, what does digital preservation even mean here? It is way more than just scanning a piece of paper. We're talking about using advanced infrastructure to guarantee long-term survival. The Noolaham Foundation is strictly digital first. They don't provide any physical access to original documents. Their entire mission is focused purely on creating a permanent, globally accessible digital memory. You can really think of their infrastructure as a kind of digital fortress. For discovery and management, they use a next-gen platform called Islandora 8. To lock down the files, they use the BAGIT specification with SHA-256 checksum manifests. I know that sounds like a mouthful, but basically, it's a highly technical way of saying their system constantly monitors the files to make sure zero data gets corrupted or suffers from bit rot over time. And their redundancy plan is next level. The core data is backed up across 4 distinct geographical locations on 3 separate continents. It is practically indestructible. Section 5, Democratizing History, Access for All. But look, a digital fortress is really only useful if the people it belongs to can actually get inside. The final, essential pillar of the Noolaham Foundation's mission is democratizing this history. It's about taking all this massive technological effort and translating it into real, tangible educational empowerment for the community. We can see this real-world impact so clearly in their youth initiatives. For instance, they coordinate Polycudum virtual learning environments to support grassroots students. They've teamed up with Tamil students from Uvawellassa University to run preparatory seminars in math and science. They even help establish student clubs focused on astronomy, computing, and human rights to really foster critical thinking outside the standard classroom curriculum. And you know, they definitely aren't doing this in a vacuum. Their documentation shows off an amazing breadth of local partnerships. They work with everyone from the Savati Digital Library to the Women's Education and Research Center, plus countless others. It really drives home the point that preserving a culture's history isn't a solo gig. It has to be a deeply collaborative, community-driven ecosystem. Now, as an explainer of this source material, it's important we step back and view this impartially. Archiving, particularly in post-conflict societies, is rarely 100% neutral. Historical narratives remain deeply contested. For example, the sources point out the British Library-sponsored EAP 2060 Palm Leaf Project in Sri Lanka. That project focused heavily on Tamil and Sanskrit manuscripts, deliberately omitting Sinhala and Pali text in that same exact region. It really highlights the deep complexities of archival work. Simply deciding what to frame, select, and digitize inevitably shapes the historical narrative that survives. Which leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought to chew on. The Noolaham Foundation shows us the unbelievable power of grassroots digital resistance, literally turning the ashes of physical destruction into an indestructible global archive. But as this practice grows worldwide, we have to ask, when memory becomes digitalized and globalized, who ultimately gets to curate a nation's history? It's a beautifully complex question, but thanks to organizations leveraging technology for preservation, it's a conversation we're incredibly fortunate to still be able to have. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.